Jacob Rowbottom joins me from Oxford, where he's an associate law professor specializing in elections and politics at the University of Oxford. Lots of criticism every election cycle on the runaway spending and the influence of big money donors. As Sean pointed out, it's estimated $5 billion will be spent this time around. How does the U.S. election spending spree compare with other countries like, let's say, the U.K. or Canada, for example?
Well, I was just listening to your report there, and $5 billion is an absolutely staggering sum of money. Over in the UK, our elections are, well, cheap by comparison. We have laws that limit the amount that can be spent during an election campaign. So a national political party in the year prior to a general election can only spend about £19 million. There's also just other reasons why our elections are cheaper. We're a smaller country, there's less to spend it on, and our election campaigns are centred around political parties rather than candidates. So just there's the cost of campaigning, which is less, but we also have legal controls that limit the amount that can be spent too.
Jacob, so much money spent on advertising, marketing. The chief executive of electoral reform there in the UK said this, and this is a quote: "We just think that there is really a grotesque amount of money spent in the U.S. on politics. If you have one party that's just able to amass a load of money and shout louder than the others, that's not healthy for democracy." How is this spending viewed there? I mean, what would an average citizen in the UK think about all this money being spent?
Oh, well, I'm not sure I can speak for anyone in the UK, but certainly my view is you look at it and the sums are just astronomical, and you wonder how that can be in tension with a democratic system, which is supposed to be based on the idea of one person, one vote. We like to think that people are equal, but on the other hand, if you've got a system where if wealth can help you get a foothold or help you campaign in an election, you think, well, does that go against this ideal of political equality? So we might see it as undermining or jeopardizing certain democratic values.
What about the length of the campaign itself? Sean, talking about in the UK, not in the UK, but Canada, 11 weeks, they felt like that was an eternity. And this thing just seems to go on and on and on.
Well, I mean, I think in most modern democracies, we're in an era where there's a permanent campaign. Most people are always thinking one step ahead. I think in America that's a particular problem because you've got these regular election cycles of, congressional elections every 2 years, presidential every 4 years. But it's increasingly like that everywhere, I think, where most political parties are always in that mode where they're gearing up or thinking about an election, even if you're not within the formal campaign.
Do you think the campaign should be publicly financed and get the big money out of the campaigns?
I think there's several things you can do. I mean, first of all, having controls in the UK, we have a problem in that you can give as much money as you want to a political party or candidate. So having controls like a donation limit, like they have in the US, but you can also have controls on the amount that's spent. But I think there's also a good case for public money as well, and increasing the amount that's given to the amount of a subsidy that's given to parties and candidates. But it's a difficult one because then you've got the tricky question of how do you distribute public funds to the parties and candidates, and that can be incredibly divisive. And there's worries that kind of decision could also be open to abuse as well.
Jacob, in the UK, debates between the parties frequently pretty heated. Sessions of Parliament can also enjoy some vigorous debate. How does that translate to campaigns there?
Well, I mean, what you referred to is, the parliamentary debates. Lots of people see those on TV, particularly Prime Minister's questions, and you see lots of members of Parliament shouting and jeering. And there's an element of that does translate over into the political campaign. It can be quite intense, quite fierce. And if you look at the covers of various newspapers, you'll see politicians trading insults with one another and newspaper editorials making some pretty fierce, and fairly insulting comments about politicians. So that heat does transfer over to the campaign. But there's another side to the story as well, in that for all of that heat, for all of the passion that's injected, which lots of political junkies like, the voter turnout, I think, for the last election was something like 66%. So there's a huge chunk of people who don't vote at all. There's a lot of cynicism over here about politicians as well. So some people get swept up by the heat of it all, but other people, I think, are left cold by it too.
Let me ask you about interest there in the UK and what's going on here in the United States as far as this election. Is it just the political junkies who are excited? Is it casual interest? Or is it still too early in the cycle for people to have their interest peak, do you think?
There is a great interest, I think, over here. I mean, partly, I think American politics is a lot more glamorous, I don't know, a lot more lively than the UK counterpart. And I think at this early stage, people are just focusing a little bit on the celebrity candidates and the idea that there's certain people who are running who are kind of against the establishment. And I think that generates a great deal of interest. So I think that's really what the media is focusing on at the moment. And obviously, as we get closer to the election, then there'll be more of a focus on, you know, who is likely to get into the White House and what the implications of that could be.
Jacob Rowbottom joining us from Oxford. Thanks so much.